Welcome back. What are we to make of President Trump's first year in office? The president and many Republicans are celebrating the white whale, tax reform, the biggest and frankly the only piece of major legislation President Trump got through the Congress in his first year. That's not nothing. It is a win. But the president failed to repeal and replace Obamacare, just the opposite. Despite shortening the sign-up period, millions more Americans, especially in Florida, signed up for coverage. The president and his supporters are feeling pretty good right now, although his numbers, approval numbers, remain mired in the middle to low 30s. And special counsel Robert Mueller has now notched 2 convictions, along with former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn cooperating with prosecutors. But what about the Democrats? In Washington, they are powerless to block anything the president does, and so far they have not come back with any coherent and consolidated message to win back voters. But Democratic voters appear energized, and polls show most Americans would now prefer Democrats controlling Congress, and they have won a series of elections, including, of all places, Alabama. Joining us for more is Frank Alcock, a former Democratic candidate for the State House and a political science professor at New College, and Christian Ziegler, Sarasota Republican State Committeeman. Welcome to you both, and happy New Year's in advance. And Frank, I want to start with you, and if for a moment you could put on your political science hat, because the Republicans who are watching this are going to say they are feeling great about the tax cuts and President Trump. And many Democrats are feeling just the opposite, and they are looking at what they believe is the worst president in American history. What are you to make of this from a political science perspective?
Well, I don't think you're going to change too many minds. I don't think you're going to get a good report card from me on the president's first year. But I think much of what happened in 2017, beyond the tax reform, just sets up. We have to look at what's coming in 2018, including the tax reform. And so that is significant. It got done. It's not going to get reversed for a little while. And where I'd like to focus our attention is on, let's look at growth. Let's look at wage growth specifically. Let's look at wage inequality, and let's look at our deficit. In my opinion, over the next 5 years, you're going to see it's going to be hard to discern the impact on overall economy of this tax cut. I'll be surprised if we get significant wage growth, especially for middle-class families, and I'm afraid that we're going to get more wage inequality, income inequality, and I think we're going to blow the deficit. So let's come back in 5 years, and if I'm wrong, then this is a good thing.
5 years? 5 years?
I think you'll start to see it within 1 year, but...
Well, Christian, it is, once again, a test in terms of what we call supply-side economics, whether or not it's going to work, whether or not it is going to result in increased growth. Because when you talk about the tax cuts, in particular to middle-class families, we're talking about maybe $1,000, $2,000 for a family of 4. In the big picture, that really is not going to have a huge impact on their lives.
Well, and I think I actually totally disagree with you, and that's where the disagreement is with Democrats. I mean, when you start saying $1,000 or $2,000 isn't going to be much to a middle-class family, I actually think a $2,000 tax cut is huge for those families. That allows them to put money towards, they can go out to eat if they want, they can have a little bit more entertainment, they can pay their bills.
I'm talking about middle-class families who live on the Suncoast, who have to make decisions every month about which bill to pay.
And that's exactly why an extra $2,000 would benefit them. I mean, you look at a family of 4, typical family of 4 making $75,000 a year, they're looking at a tax cut of $2,000. That's an extra $2,000 that they earned that they get to put back in their pocket. I think that's a lot of money, and I think when the tax cuts actually get implemented and people start getting their paychecks and they start seeing how much money they get to keep of their own money, again, this isn't the government's money, this is their money, they're going to be happy and they're going to go to the polls and show it.
I'm wondering what you make of this, because rightfully Republicans have a right to crow that they got something big done. The other day, the president went to a firehouse in the Palm Beach area and claimed that he signed more legislation into law than any of his predecessors at this point in their term, including Harry Truman, when that's flat out not true.
Well, and I don't know about that quote.
Because they made the papers, a lot of them.
Well, I didn't personally read the quote, but I can tell you when you look at what he's done with regulations.
I'm not talking about regulation.
Well, I mean, but that actually impacts.
Boast about the regulation if you want. I'm talking about him saying he signed more laws into... Hold on one second. He claims that he signed more legislation into law when factually That is not true.
But again, the media digs into everything he says, and you want to jump on that, and you want to focus on that, pull a quote from some random event. I'll tell you, when Obama was using executive orders to do stuff, they counted those as Obama accomplishments, like DACA and other things that he did through executive order. But when Trump does executive orders, all of a sudden those aren't accomplishments. He didn't accomplish anything. But when you look at it through regulations, through executive orders, he has had a record term, and he's done a great job, I think, in my mind.
Then say it includes executive orders. Why make up
But the media
something?
never made that difference when Obama was in it. DACA, did anyone say that, oh, that's not an Obama accomplishment? That wasn't a legislative. All they did was attach that to Obama as something good that he did.
We are getting warmed up. You can tell. We'll have much more on the Year in Politics right after we check First Alert Weather. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are talking about the week and the year in Washington. And joining us for more is Frank Alcock, a former Democratic candidate for State House and a political science professor at New College, and Christian Ziegler, Sarasota Republican State Committee man. Year-long story, week-long story, the continuing Russia investigation. We have seen already criminal guilty pleas, including that of Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor, who is now cooperating with prosecutors. I would imagine if you look at the timeline, 2018 is really going to be, we haven't seen anything yet, Frank. Just gut feeling, what are you expecting here?
I think he's going to go after Kushner. I mean, I think that's what he's been lining up.
Where does that come from? I mean, why do you think that?
I think the previous indictments that he has gotten and the deals that he's cut, it doesn't signal an end game for Mueller. And so given the leaks that we've had thus far, the revelations of Kushner's involvement in terms of the communications between the Trump campaign and the Russians, I think that's who he has his sights on. If it ends up going, if he's got more, if he's got actual evidence of obstruction, then it's going to get very interesting. If not, if he ends up wrapping it up, then I think the president's wise to play it as he has done this past week. But I do think we haven't seen, I think it's going to get ugly this year.
Christian, I'm going to let you respond to that, but I first want to point out, just today, there was a story that came out that Special Counsel Robert Mueller has begun to question RNC staffers about the party's 2016 data campaign, data operation, and its connection with the Trump campaign, and related to activities of Russian trolls and bots aimed at influencing the American electorate. And of course, it was Jared Kushner, as Frank mentioned, who ran that for the Trump campaign.
Actually, one of my best friends was the chief data officer at the RNC. And I'll tell you, there's nothing there, at least with the RNC. And it's somewhat humorous. You ask Frank, Frank, what's your gut feeling on this? And really, the truth is, that's all they have are gut feelings, because there's no proof.
You look at no proof?
Well, because Congressman Adam Schiff, who's the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, has said that he's come across no evidence that there was Russian collusion.
He hasn't said that.
No, he actually has said he has not yet come across any evidence of Russian collusion. Is what he said. Now, it doesn't mean that it might not be out there, and obviously the Democrats are going to focus on that. But as of today, there is no evidence of that.
And I trust Mueller. If there is no evidence, then I don't think you're going to see much more. But I do trust that guy.
All right. Let me raise one other issue, and then I want to move on to some international news and events. Francis Rooney, who is the congressman from Naples, was on MSNBC the other day, and he said this.
I don't want to discredit them. I would like to see the directors of those agencies purge it and say, look, we've got a lot of great agents, a lot of great lawyers here. Those are the people that I want the American people to see and know the good work's being done, not these people who are kind of the deep state.
All right. The reason why that is important, and of course in the context, there has been a story going on in terms of one of the FBI agents who was initially assigned to the Mueller investigation, corresponding with his girlfriend over a government telephone by text message, taking shots at President Trump, among other people. But the question to you, Christian, would be, should there be a purge? And mind you, that kind of rears up, pictures and depictions of what the Soviets did in terms of purging people from the government who were not loyal. Should there be a purge in the FBI of anyone who may be a registered Democrat or maybe given money to Democratic candidates?
Congressman Francis Rooney is a great guy, and I think what he was mentioning there that was pulled out is there is an issue with, it's not loyalty, but it's individuals that are in positions of power that are doing it for political purposes. And I would say overwhelmingly at the FBI, there's a lot of professional agents. I know a lot of them growing up. I lived in a community with a lot of FBI agents around me. Overwhelmingly professional. Now, the issue that you have is when you start looking at the government, not just the FBI, but every single agency across the board. Donald Trump got about 4% of the vote in Washington, popular vote. And when you look at all of those employees, there are a lot of them that are working from within the government to stop what he's trying to do. And they've also been recruited by Democrats to do that. Heard that on NPR. That's a very well-known fact. So I think there definitely needs to be, when you look at the agencies, the federal government agencies, the American people sent Trump into Washington to clean up the entire system. And whether that's a purge or not, and however you want to describe it, it has to happen.
The word purge, it's one of those words that from our history and what we know about the Soviet Union is a really dangerous idea of purging people because of political beliefs. Hold on one second. I mean, should they also be looking for Republican agents who may have done something else? After all, it was the FBI who reopened that email investigation 10 days before the election, which many would argue sunk Hillary Clinton's chances.
So we have the Hatch Act in place at the federal government level for a reason. You're not supposed to disclose what your political beliefs are when you're in a role. Now, the way it works is you have the president at the top, and then he starts hiring people below him, and they can pick whatever team they want under them. Just because someone's worked for a federal agency for 10, 15, 20 years doesn't mean that they have a right to that position. And I think when you have new leadership in the White House, he has a right to go down and clean up the roles. And if anyone is doing anything for political purposes within the government, they absolutely should be on their way out the door.
There's a degree of discretion that all presidents have. I think this one's going to go way beyond it. I do think it will get ugly. I think it's a president that does not like scrutiny, and if there are any supposedly independent entities, whether they be in the judicial branch or within his own executive agency, and they're coming up with something that he doesn't like, he will do anything he possibly can to undercut them and to disqualify, delegitimize them.
Let's turn to international politics. Obviously, we have the continuing threat in terms of Korea and their ballistic missile launches. You have a lot going on in the Middle East with the U.S. Saying that it's going to move its embassy to Jerusalem. You have the fight against ISIS, which it looks like ISIS, thankfully, is on its death's door, we hope, in terms of how much territory that they control. Frank, what do you make of all that?
I'm nervous. I mean, the stakes of these issues that we're talking about are well above a lot of what we have to deal with sometimes on domestic politics. You can't screw up. And this is a president that wrote The Art of the Deal. We're not done yet. We're in the middle of a process, but there's something that I see him missing is a lack of understanding in his realm about leverage. I'm not sure. I think he's losing leverage over the North Koreans. I think he's losing leverage over the Iranians. I think he's losing leverage in the trade deals. I think he's resorting to tactics that worked well for him in business within a pretty structured legal environment. This is a whole different game when you're talking about, you know, raw knuckles, real politics at the international level. And so we will see. We're not done yet, but I see him losing leverage by the day. And I think we're going to be at a bad place as a nation within the next couple of years.
You're shaking your head.
Yeah, we're stronger than we've ever been. We're showing our support for Israel. It was just announced earlier today that there's an agreement between the United States and Israel to block Iran from pursuing nuclear weapons. That's an agreement that we made with Israel. That's leverage there. We have leverage over in North Korea. If you want to talk about leverage, we got the Chinese that are starting to get involved now. They're getting off the bench. They've been on the bench for years.
But there was a story today that South Korea actually got video evidence of a Chinese freighter delivering oil to North Korean freighters.
I mean, okay, so there's this boat with, delivering, who knows what's happening.
It's not supposed to happen.
But sometimes there's a lot of crime that goes on. There's a lot of stuff that happens with our country where they import stuff into terrorist-prone countries that are individual bad actors. It doesn't mean as a whole that's the issue. I mean, we see the Chinese as a government. They've been playing in North Korea. You want to talk about ISIS? 35,000 ISIS soldiers under Obama's watch, we're down to 1,000 under Trump. There was a report that just released. They are on the run. They're being exterminated.
Right. Who created the strategy that's being
He's just
right
following through on
I think
Obama's
that
plans.
no, it's not Obama's plan, because Obama stood on the sidelines. He didn't want to engage. He was worried about shaking up the Middle East. He didn't know where to go, who to go after. I think really what it comes down to is we have a Secretary of Defense in James Mattis that is well respected throughout the whole country and throughout the military force, that's aggressive, and he's the one going after him.
We have to take a quick break, and we'll be back for final thoughts in 1 minute or two. All right, we have 2 minutes. I'm going to both direct you to quotes from people in your own party. From Seth Moulton, the congressman from Massachusetts, Frank, if we can't figure out as a party how to win in 2018, we're going to be in tough shape for 2020. I think it's a huge political mistake for Democrats to even be talking about 2020 at this point.
Oh, I would agree. Let's 1 year at a time. And I think the focus has to be, you had said at the outset that there is no message. I think the message gets jarbled sometimes, but it's a focus on the middle class, and I think their plight is not going to improve under this president. And I think a message that will resonate, and I've heard it before, it's make America sane again. It's getting crazier and crazier, and I think you'll see that message resonate as we move through the Trump administration. People just want sanity. Things are getting crazy.
All right, question from one of your heroes, Senator Jeff Flake.
Yeah, right.
When you look at some of the audiences cheering for Republicans, sometimes you look out there and you say, these are spasms of a dying party. By and large, we are appealing to older white men, and there are just a limited number of them.
I can't take Jeff Flake seriously. He's part of the establishment wing that wants to hold on to power as long as they can in Washington. Trump was sent there, and he was elected by the American people to change it up and take the power from the establishment. And you are going to have people like Jeff Flake, other individuals, maybe John McCain, some of these other ones that have been in Washington maybe a little too long. They're a little out of touch. They don't see for the average American, and they're still going to be frustrated with what's going on. And meanwhile, Trump is just going to continue his success on behalf of the American people.
Okay, gentlemen, I wish you a Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
It's been an
Happy
honor
New
and
Year.
a pleasure.